Chapter 9. One morning in March of 1988, I had myself a nice, vibrant workout at Taekwondo class and then headed to work. Arrived early at PSD, I did some homework for a class I took at Temple University. I had a more balanced schedule, taking few courses part time and thus doing a better job of managing my grades. This was much better than the time I had too much on my plate and wound up on academic probation. But college was still somewhat of a hollow experience. In contrast to Taekwondo and PSD, there was the sense of emptiness that I felt at Temple, a gnawing feeling that I was missing out on something. On this day, though, I didn't allow dreary homework assignment to pull me down. I finished quickly and bounced down the stairs of the dorm, ready for another day on the job. Linda was already in the hallway on the first floor, and she greeted me with some unbelievable news. Did you hear about Gallaudet? The students are on strike. I did a double take. I must have misunderstood. What? I asked. The teachers went on strike? What for? No, the students went on strike. There was an election for president of Gallaudet University, and two of the three finalists were deaf. The hearing person won, and now the students have shut down the university. They're demanding a deaf president. Whoa. This was something else. This was history in the making. You could feel the surge in deaf pride throughout the world. That whole week, March 6th to March 13th, had everyone's attention. Up until that point, I had never really given much thought about Gallaudet University, which is in Washington, D.C. Back in 1984, I had chosen Temple University so that I could stay in Philadelphia area to be close to my girlfriend. Bad move, I know. But that was then, and this is now, and Gallaudet had my undivided attention. It had everyone's attention. Students and staff at PSD posted banners in support of Gallaudet students' quest, as did many schools all over the world. The whole deaf community was abuzz. It didn't take long for events at Gallaudet to cause a stir in the hearing world. Either this protest, which came to be known as Deaf President Now, featuring students, alumni, and countless supporters and many leaders of the deaf community. Not only were the gates of Gallaudet effectively blockaded, but also there was an emotional march to the Capitol. At first, there was a local media coverage, but soon it went national. Greg Hilbuck, one of the student leaders behind the protest, was interviewed on ABC's Nightline for the whole world to see. Jesse Jackson offered his support to the deaf community. It was unprecedented. The solidarity felt among the deaf community was unbelievable. I could feel it in Philadelphia, and I knew that there were deaf people who could feel it in Bora Bora. Dr. Elizabeth Zienzer, the hearing president-elect of Gallaudet University, certainly felt it. She acknowledged what was happening around her and gracefully resigned her post. Finally, on March 13th of 1988, it was announced that Dr. I. King Jordan, a longtime deaf faculty member at Gallaudet, had been selected as the new president. The entire campus erupted in celebration, as did the deaf community all over the world. For an in-depth historical account of everything that led up to Deaf President Now movement, I highly recommend Dr. Jack Gannon's book, The Week the World Heard Gallaudet. As a deaf individual, I consider this event to be one of the most significant parts of my heritage. Chalk this up to something that to be repeatedly told to the grandkids with a deep sense of deaf pride. Shortly after the Deaf President Now movement, there were some changes at PSD that directly affected me. Sometime in the following year, it was decided that the dorms would have to close. The number of residential students had dwindled from 14 to 8, a far cry from the days of residential life at the old PSD, which used to be located near Mount Airy. By 1983, the Rebella surge of deaf students had significantly subsided, resulting in a predictable decline of incoming deaf students. On the top of that, the political interpretation of PL 94 142 and its least restrictive environment ideology resulted in many students being placed into mainstream schools instead of PSD, whether they or their parents wanted it or not. Today, many deaf schools face similar issues. School districts often look deaf schools as the last option, meaning everything from hearing schools to assistive devices have to be tried first before a deaf school will be considered. The problem is this approach is that when it becomes clear an auditory-based approach isn't working, valuable time has been lost. When deaf kids are belatedly given the opportunity to attend deaf school, they are already suffering the effects of language deprivation. My fear is that many people will look at deaf schools and assume that this is where language deprivation originated. They may also make the assumption about the use of ASL in the classroom. The truth is, deaf schools are where students begin to recover from language deprivation. Unfortunately, a full recovery is unlikely. And previously mentioned, if a child has not had enough exposure to language between the ages of 0 to 5, it will always be a never ending game of catch up. Great strides can definitely be made when a language deprived student transfers to a deaf school, but the damage has already been done. Many deaf schools face formidable challenge of repairing this damage the best they can, in addition to accepting students with their other challenges, such as learning disabilities, behavior issues, and multiple disabilities. School districts know that ASL is effective for deaf students, but as much as possible they still make deaf schools the last resort. As I laminated in Madness in the Mainstream, when the chips are down, they have unresponsive kids with multiple issues that they can't handle. That's when they decide an ASL friendly deaf school will save the day. Deaf schools simply do not get enough credit for the incredible impact they have on deaf children. As for PSD, it turned out that the decline in rubella babies and the advent of PL 94 142 had affected the student population so much that it was no longer economically feasible to run a K 12 school on a large campus. Given the political climate at the time, PSD was at risk of closing its doors for good. But in 1984, PSD made a cost effective move to its current Germantown location, where it temporarily downsized by closing the high school program. Initially, the new PSD offered an academic program for students between the ages of 3 to 15, as well as early intervention services for ages 0 to 3. Since those big changes in the mid 80s, PSD has bounced back quite strongly, becoming a big part of the Germantown community. By 2001 and 2002 school year, PSD continued its remarkable comeback by reestablishing its high school program. In 1989, however, the dorm had to close, since there were only 8 residential students left out of about 175 students overall. It didn't make sense to have the residential program. Instead, it would be necessary to use the dorm building in such a manner that it would serve more than just 8 people. In place of a dorm, PSD opened its Center for Community and Professional Services, CCPS, would have public relations office and community outreach program, which included sign language classes, adult literacy classes, social services for the deaf community, and AIDS education program, and continuation of the successful early intervention program. Closing the dorm was not a step backwards, but instead a step forwards, which made better use of the space available. Thus, the step forward meant that my days as a residential advisor were numbered. Of course, PSD was not going to kick me out on the street. Headmaster Joseph Fischgrund had seen to it that all residential staff were offered regular day jobs for the fall of 1989. For me, the changes in store presented a fork in the road. It was either accept a job as a teacher's aide, the only position which I was qualified for, or transfer to from Temple to Gallaudet University. Linda had often encouraged me to go there when the time was right, and at this juncture, the time was now. In August of 1989, I packed my bags and headed to Gallaudet University. For the first time in my life, I would be a student surrounded by deaf peers. What had waited was the most magical periods of my life. During the 2-week new student orientation prior to the start of fall classes, I made lots of friends immediately, something I'd never done in any of my other educational settings. In between getting to know each other and touring Washington, D.C., there were placement exams that would be determined what level of classes we would take in certain subjects. Although NSO had many practical purposes, the best one was that it enabled us to establish a strong base of friends whom we could lean on for support in the rest of our college years. Academically, I found myself totally out of whack. On one hand, I was ahead of the curve in English. The results of my NSO English evaluation got me waived from general English requirements. Instead of 2 years of English, which students had to take upon passing or waiving of remedial English 50 course, I could take 1 year of honors English and be done with it. But mathematically, I was a mess. During the NSO math proficiency test, I bombed. I had no recollection of the complex formulas and applications I had learned so many years ago. The best math work I ever did was at GFS in 1984 and at Temple in 1985. But in 1989, I couldn't remember squat. As a result, I was required to take Remedial Algebra 2 class at Gallaudet. I was incredulous. I wanted to give the admissions office a piece of my mind. "Excuse me, but I'm too old for this. I've forgotten more math than you've ever learned." That was the problem. I had forgot it all. The ironic thing was that it didn't take any math classes at Temple that would have counted for a transfer credit at Gallaudet, because of those classes were waived on account of the work that I did at GFS. My attempts at explaining this fell on deaf ears, pardon the pun. As far as Gallaudet was concerned, I was an English whiz and a math moron. Shortly afterward, the admissions office informed me that several courses I had taken at Temple, with a total of 30 credits, were not offered at Gallaudet, so I couldn't get credit for them either. I was dumbfounded. It was like a whole year's worth of work at Temple was tossed aside. I started thinking that perhaps I'd made a mistake. Let me get this straight. I had to take remedial math class, and 30 credits just flew out the window. This is not a good start. All I wanted was a BA degree, and it felt like I was going backwards. As exciting as it was to be at Gallaudet, I still had one goal firmly set in mind: to graduate as soon as possible. It suddenly dawned on me that if I returned to Temple, I would graduate much sooner. At this point, I told my friends it was nice to meet them, but I'd messed around too much in my life and couldn't afford to waste any more time. Fortunately, I met a friend during NSO, Vijay Advanti, or Vijay Advanti. He talked me out of leaving Gallaudet at the last minute. Yes, he acknowledged that there was some maddening red tape. Yes, he agreed. It was a setback. But no, he insisted it would not be a waste of time. Instead, it would be an opportunity and a blessing in disguise. Vijay pointed out all of the things that I had missed out on as a mainstream student in high school and at Temple. There were plenty of positive experiences, both social and academic, that were waiting for me at Gallaudet. Wasn't NSO one of the most enjoyable times of my life? Couldn't I just taste the excitement of living in a different world, one with 100% accessibility? On top of that, Vijay added, my mainstream background had turned me into a mindless automaton. Whatever the hearing folks did, I followed, no questions asked. You've passively accepted everything that's ever happened to you, he explained. You didn't have a choice. You were alone in the hearing world, but it's not like that here. At Gallaudet, you can be anything you want. You can speak for yourself. Now haul your butt over to admissions office and get your credits back. He was right. I went straight to the admissions office and filed an appeal to further review my transcript. Wonders of wonders, this time the folks at the office actually listened. I wound up getting 15 of my credits back. For me, that was a great victory. It was nice to speak up for myself and get results. I realized that in the hearing world, I'd grown accustomed to the futility of it all. I was used to mindlessly living in the world of sit down, shut up, wear your hearing aid, and never mind. It's not important. I'll tell you later. Just do what your teacher says. Those days were over. I was now totally immersed in a world where I could speak for myself, even if my math sucked. As fate would have it, my very first class at Gallaudet, as a Gallaudet student, was Remedial Algebra 2 class. I was so upset about. I arrived early for the 8 a.m. class, grumbling how quadratic formula with no relevance in my life whatsoever. My disgust, however, immediately switched to delight as my teacher walked in and introduced herself. She was a deaf woman, and she was signing in her native ASL. For me, this was history, my first ever deaf teacher. Unbelievable. Everywhere I looked, I could understand clearly what was being said. At the moment, it was being said. Whenever the teacher or the students signed information, signed information was there for me instantly comprehend. As plain as day. With an interpreter in high school, I was always just a little bit behind. By the time my interpreter finished interpreting the question, the other students had already heard it, and someone was inevitably responding to it before I had time to come up with an answer. Not anymore. Welcome to real-time education, baby. This was an instant access. No more 3-second delay. Finally, I felt like I was really there, experiencing everything as it happened. I wasn't living in a fishbowl anymore. I noticed that I was incredibly relaxed, a big difference compared to how I often felt on the edge in high school. Wonders of wonders, I was actually enjoying a class. Yes, I was. My teacher's ASL was too good to be true. It blew me away. Although I had passed my math courses at GFS and Temple, it took a lot of hard work and frustration at every level. For the first time anywhere, I was not struggling to grasp anything. The instructor's ASL was so smooth and clear, I could literally see the concepts and comprehend them right away. Her hands, utilizing the space around her, deftly gave the impression of factors dividing in the air. ASL, as I could see very well here, happens to be very spatial and conceptual, and I had much to benefit from its exposure. Yes, I had qualified interpreters in high school and college, but they weren't math teachers themselves. I had to follow them following spoken instructions. Plus, I had to glance back and forth between them and the blackboard. The bits and pieces that I missed were apparently more important than I'd realized. With a teacher communicating directly with me through ASL, concepts were smacking me right in the face in a way that's hard to describe. I just couldn't miss. As I was contemplating how my first exposure to ASL in the classroom was opening my eyes to an entirely new world, I couldn't help but thinking of a book that I had once read, Alan Watts' Cloud Hidden, Whereabouts Unknown. Watts was ruminating on the beauty of Chinese writing in 1970 when he said, I have always been in love with Chinese writing, each character or ideogram, an abstract picture of some feature of the process of nature, that is, of the Tao and the way of or course of the universe. When translated very literally to English, the Chinese reads like a telegram. Tao can, Tao not eternal Tao, or way can speak about not eternal way. In contrast with English, the particularly German or Japanese, Chinese is the fastest and shortest way of saying things, both in speech and in writing. If, as it seems possible, Mao Zedong's people switch to an alphabet form of writing, they will be at a great disadvantage, for as their own proverb says, one picture is worth 1,000 words. When I read this expert of Watt's book, I realize that he very well could have described the beauty of ASL. One sign is worth 1,000 words. After my experiences with ASL at PSD, which then culminated at Gallaudet, I am one of those staunchest advocates for ASL in the classroom. It is a beautiful thing. Not every teacher, however, was as fluent in ASL as the students might have liked. If I had to rank the teachers based on signing skills, I would use a scale that acknowledged the levels of such as beginner, intermediate, advanced, and native ASL. My estimate is that most of the teachers fell between the intermediate and advanced. A small number of them signed clumsily, and a small number are native signers. If you had a lousy signing teacher, though, tough luck. If you had a deaf teacher who signed fluent ASL, you hit the jackpot. To me, a teacher's signing ability didn't really matter that much, as long as it wasn't horrendous. Yes, I preferred ASL, but it didn't bother me the least if I heard a hearing teacher with the tendency to use C signed exact English. C doesn't hold a candle to ASL in terms of convenience and practicality, but I could tolerate it. After those years in hearing schools with no interpreter, any teacher who signed, no matter how awkwardly, was a blessing, even if the teacher's signing skills were marginal at best. I still preferred that to having a skilled interpreter in a hearing school. With a teacher who signs, you can let your eyes wander, you can follow the teacher and glance over to the students, and so on. With an interpreter, you have to sit there with your eyes glued to the same limited space all day. It's exhausting on the eyes. Give me a signing teacher any day, even if she's using the Rochester method. The Gallaudet faculty, regardless of signing level, was an incredible liberating thrill. Despite my exuberance over the fact that all my teachers signed, there were some students who complained about the teachers who didn't use bona fide ASL. Most of these students were prelingually deaf and native signers themselves. I was intrigued by their argument that every teacher should use ASL because it wasn't much of a big deal to me. When I realized I had an unfair advantage, my residual hearing was good enough so that I could use a combination of hearing and lip reading, which was supported by whatever signing skills a teacher had. For example, I could hear a teacher's voice, but not comprehend everything that she was saying. When she signed, however, it would fill in the blanks. Likewise, if the same teacher signed something incorrectly, my ability to hear her voice and read her lips would compensate for the incorrect sign. Many prelingually deaf students do not have this ability. With this in mind, I decided to try an experiment. I would zero in on the teacher's hands and completely ignore her voice and her lips. I was shocked to find that in many cases I became completely lost. It often looked like the teacher was signing in broken sentences. An inability to properly bridge two sentences could often make it look like the teacher jumped in entirely off the point. It was disorienting. Later on, I would try this same experiment on a number of deaf residential schools, with the same results. Only when the teacher signed in ASL was I able to fully comprehend what was being said. Eventually, a student organization at Gallaudet took it upon themselves to publish an underground guidebook that rated the teachers based on their signing competence and overall content of classwork. It was a brutally honest guidebook. Yes, some of the teachers were livid, but it helped. I personally took advantage of it. When it came to taking courses that were related to my weakest areas, such as math and technology, I tried to my best to make sure I got a class with a teacher that used ASL. Technical idiot that I am, I would never have received a B plus in television, film, and photography course if it weren't for the deaf teacher who signed an ASL. That's just the way it is. As my first year at Gallaudet continued, there were more things that I would learn about the deaf world. Social life, and not surprisingly, was incredible. I estimated that in about 1 or 2 semesters at Gallaudet, I made more friends than I'd ever had in my entire lifetime of attending hearing schools in Philadelphia. I was in deaf heaven. I also noticed that this deaf heaven was a large melting pot. There was a wide continuum of deaf people with varying communication skills and backgrounds, which brought up some intriguing issues. There are deaf children whose deaf parents are fluent in ASL and have a strong language base. And there are deaf children whose hearing parents learn and use ASL. There are deaf children whose hearing parents use C-sign to communicate. There are deaf children whose hearing parents have no knowledge or interest in any kind of sign language whatsoever. There are deaf children whose hearing parents strictly enforce the oral method. And then there are those who are hard of hearing or latent deafened, and some of them coming to Gallaudet with no sign ability at all. If this isn't diverse enough, now factor in the varying educational backgrounds of all these deaf people. There are residential schools for the deaf, day schools for the deaf programs in hearing schools, oral schools, and some deaf children simply attend their local hearing schools with or without an interpreter, as I did, and find a way to get by. Not only is this the use or non-use of sign language an issue, but we also have to keep in mind that the quality of curricula itself. Some deaf programs are good, some are lacking. The same goes for mainstream programs. Some may be good in terms of academic content, but others are insufficient nonetheless because of the differing communication methodologies that leave some deaf students completely lost. Also, there is a considerable number of international students who come from countries where the programs and services for the deaf are unheard of, and so on and so on. Now take all these deaf people with such a diverse social and educational backgrounds and throw them into the only university in the world for the deaf. What do you have? Several professors scratching their heads wondering how to accommodate everyone. Sometimes this presents an awkward situation. What happens is that some teachers in the general requirement courses wind up lowering their standards to accommodate the students who are significantly behind academically. They know about the language deprivation that many deaf students endure throughout their developmental years. This, alongside the fact that it's impossible for every high school in the world to have an excellent deaf program. This results in Gallaudet professors having a number of students in their classes who struggle with literacy. On the one hand, I don't like seeing classroom standard lowered for deaf students, but on the other hand, I completely understand this dilemma in which teachers of the deaf will often find themselves. It's not easy to teach a class where there's a significant wide range of academic skills. Whereas hearing people can choose from many post-secondary institutions that best match their ability. Maybe it would be a smaller junior college or a large university, perhaps Yale or Harvard. There is only one university for the deaf. Gallaudet professors have to deal with all of this, for better or for worse. No, I'm not implying that Gallaudet is the only option for deaf college students. Many deaf people can and do attend hearing universities, which have varying levels of services and accessibility for the deaf. Nonetheless, a wide range of deaf people with a wide range of academic backgrounds choose to attend Gallaudet. It's a wonderfully unique experience, and it's hard to pass up. Also, there's another thing teachers need to keep in mind. Just because a student struggles with English doesn't mean the student lacks intelligence. I've met several students who demonstrated a deep understanding of complex academic topics in the classroom discussion, yet struggled when it came to given written assignments on the very same topics. I've met students who could easily fix a computer and had a hard time following textbooks. It's a difficult balancing act for the teachers who can challenge their students in the classroom, but run into a roadblock with written tests and assignments. During my years at Gallaudet in the early 90s, pretty much every deaf individual had a fair shot to succeed at Gallaudet. Sometimes students with stronger academic backgrounds were annoyed when teachers of general requirement courses modified homework and assignments to accommodate those who were not as literate. No, Gallaudet is not a diploma mill. Core courses related to your major, as well as most junior and senior year courses, were and still are appropriately challenging. It was usually in freshman and sophomore general requirement courses where the teachers sometimes lowered the bar. It gave the academically challenged students an opportunity to make the adjustment to college. Some made it and some didn't. Eventually, this changed somewhat. By the spring of 1995, there was an overhaul to some of Gallaudet's programs. Due to federally mandated budget cuts, it was necessary for the university to come up with what was called the Vision Implementation Plan, designed for more cost-effective management of the university. The VIP brought forth the elimination of some classes and programs that were deemed not challenging enough. There was also an innovative new program called the Literacy 2000. This was implemented to help students improve their English skills. Based on these moves, as well as feedback from faculty and students, the bar for academic standards at Gallaudet was significantly raised, including admission standards. I know it could be argued that this might not be fair to some individuals who deserve a chance to catch up, but I feel that the responsibility was initially put in the wrong place. It's not Gallaudet's job to teach what should have been taught during grade school and high school. I feel strongly that it is the responsibility of early intervention programs, advocacy groups, residential schools, and mainstream programs, and junior colleges to effectively advocate for and provide an accessible education to prepare deaf students for the tremendous experience that is Gallaudet University. All of these need to bridge together to create a path towards a successful post-secondary education. And it is absolutely must begin in early intervention, where the optimal window of opportunity for language acquisition exists. As time went by, and as I got my general requirement courses out of the way, I really enjoyed getting deep into courses that were related to my psychology major. Outside of the classroom, I caught up on missed social opportunities of the past years by making a good number of friends. Of course, quality is better than quantity, and I found myself mostly hanging out with one very special group. This group consisted of Jeff Jones, Vijay Advani, Jason McKinney, Derek Grambrill, and myself. You couldn't find a bunch of people anywhere with more differences than ours. Jeff and I are white, Jason and Derek are black, and Vijay hails from India. Jeff is from a Catholic family. I come from a Jewish family. Vijay is Hindu, and Jason and Derek come from different Protestant denominations. It didn't matter. Living on the same floor in the Pete Hall dorm, we all became close friends. We found that we all shared the same warped sense of humor and bonded quickly. One resident assistant in Pete Hall noticed us hanging out and remarked that it was amazing how people who were so different could get along so well. Jason, who was my roommate, just smiled and said, "Hey, we're the family." The resident assistant scratched her head as the rest of us cracked up. She didn't notice that while Jason's mouth was saying "we're the family," his hand simplified finger spelled WTF. I couldn't have said it any better, though. We really were and still are a family. We didn't care about our differences or similarities, as deaf people overcame any differences in race and religion. We hung out as much as we could and learned so much from each other. Disclaimer: just because someone is deaf doesn't mean that he or she isn't a bigot. Unfortunately, bigotry exists in the deaf community too. I just consider myself fortunate to have a bunch of buddies who get along so well, no matter how different our backgrounds are. Often, usually on the weekends, we would meet in room 206, where Vijay and Jeff were roommates. Unlike other dorm parties, ours was not always the wild, lampshade on the head variety. Instead, we would stay up all night watching movies and having philosophical conversations until 6 in the morning. These conversations were incredibly insightful. We weren't the first nor the last group of college kids to do this. Anytime a group of people got together to relax and shoot the breeze, sooner or later, someone comes up with something that makes everyone say, "Whoa, that's deep." For all I know, my hearing friends might have had a group conversation going where they found the missing pieces to Einstein's unified field theory. If they did, I must have missed it. With my deaf friends, I missed nothing. There are certain dynamics in the group process where we can learn so much from each other. But it is possible only if we have full, unrestricted access and input. Sure, I had interpreters at Temple University, but I couldn't take them with me on late-night discussions in the dorm. My education there was limited to only what happened in the classroom. At Gallaudet, the learning experience ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In the spring of 1990, most of my friends took off for a wild spring break in Florida, but I stayed behind. An old friend encouraged me to play Division III basketball, even if it had been more than 5 years. Division III baseball, even if it had been more than 5 years since I had last threw a pitch. I figured I would give it a shot and try out for the Gallaudet baseball team. I soon found that I couldn't pitch like I used to, but I made the team anyways as a shortstop. The experiences that would follow were amazing. They also served as a microcosm to everything that I needed to learn about deaf culture. As I routinely attended baseball practice, there was another awakening of sorts. In academics, when I attended my first class at Gallaudet, it was like a huge relief. I remembered all the stress all that I had gone through as the only deaf kid in high school, and finally could now relax in the deaf classroom with unlimited access. With baseball, however, I had always enjoyed the game, no matter who I played with. Yet I began to realize that the Gallaudet baseball team brought forth another new world that I never knew existed. In the past, on the hearing ball clubs that I played for, I would just show up and play, and I was satisfied with whatever happened on the field. On the Gallaudet team, it was an opportunity to be involved in everything, both on the field and off the field. Talent wise, the best team I ever played with had to be the 1984 GFS team, which won its league championship. I had a blast playing with them. But because I was deaf, I was never involved in any of the locker room banter or any of the pranks that went on. During road trips, I would stare contentedly out the bus window while others were joking around. I never really felt bad about it. I knew that I was deaf and that was just the way it is. I was just happy to get a chance to play. I didn't know what I was missing anyways. I didn't know what I was missing, and that's what I now tell everyone who argues against the belief that deaf children should have the opportunity to interact with others like themselves. I had many non-culturally deaf people tell me that they are doing great in the hearing world and getting by on oralism and never signing, and that they are happy and successful doing so. I too was once like that. I was proud of my status as the only deaf graduate of GFS, proud of my job at the supermarket, and proud of my ability to interact with hearing people the way that I did. And I didn't know what I was missing. Being on the Gallaudet team more than woke me up to what I previously missed out on. I experienced baseball as I never had before. The communication I was part of on the field was entirely new to me. The catcher would sign instructions to the pitcher, who would then advise me, the shortstop, to be on my toes for what might happen next. I would keep the chain of communication going by turning around and making sure the outfielders knew what was going on. Often, I would talk strategy with one of the other infielders. The dialogue was continuous, a far cry from the days when I just stood there at whatever position I was supposed to cover. Sometimes it would get a little weird, just to wake everyone up. Occasionally, I'd give an outfielder a dirty joke instead of a strategic information, just to see if he was paying attention. I was able to be a leader or a clown, depending on what situation called for. I had never really got to be like this on a hearing team I had ever played for. The stories about the Gallaudet baseball could easily go on for an entire chapter or more. One of our favorites is the time that our coach, Vance, got tired of us forgetting our signals as he relayed them from the third base coach's box. He often ran a complicated sequence of signals, which included decoys, the indicator, the primary signal, and signals that meant try again or ignore previous signal. Sometimes the players got overwhelmed with this. On one occasion, a runner on first base got discombobulated as he tried to decipher an array of incoming signals. He was supposed to steal second base, but he kept missing the sign. Vance rolled his eyes and switched to signing an ASL, which the other team didn't understand anyways. Go ahead, Vance signed with exasperation. Steal second base. Go whenever you want. The player did, and the team howled with laughter. There was also Vance's favorite dummy play, where he'd have a runner on first base purposely drift too far off the bag, and the other team would try to pick him off, and then he'd suddenly take off for second base. During the ensuing rundown, a runner on third would zoom home and score. We would laugh about all of these antics on road trips, and we would swap stories and jokes on the bus. We told a lot of deaf jokes. We talked baseball. We talked about anything. I never knew that there was so much more to being on a baseball team than what happened between the foul lines. I never knew that a baseball team could be such a close-knit family. I didn't know what I was missing. If the baseball team gave me a taste of leadership skills, That was just the tip of the iceberg. Several of my classes had group projects and presentations that required a lot of teamwork and effort. Previously, I'd been accustomed to just going along with whatever my hearing peers decided to do. I was a puppet, the ultimate yes man with a hearing aid. At Gallaudet, this was no longer the case. My input was not only expected, but it was highly valued. It took a while to get used to this. I was so used to being left out of the group situations that sometimes I would automatically zone out. My mind would occasionally drift away whenever more than 3 people had a conversation. It was a natural habit that was born out of necessity. Anytime my hearing peers or family got together, I could only manage to understand one-on-one conversations. On a good day, sometimes I could manage two-on-one. But when a group got together, that was it. Game over. I'd be bored out of my mind and I'd always accept it. Again, back to when I was a kid, it was ingrained in my mind that being deaf was a bad thing and I needed to be fixed. So I couldn't understand anyone. So if I couldn't understand anyone, I figured it was my responsibility. I never complained when I got lost during a group discussion. Instead of getting bored to tears, I just got into the habit of where my mind would detach from whatever was going on around me. I would entertain itself by flying off to other some other world far, far away. In a weird way, this functioned as a screensaver for my mind. Why waste energy having my brain working when there was nothing I could contribute? For that reason, I often zoned out. I was a space cadet, a frequent flyer at that. Joel, snap out of it. These people are talking your language. It took a while to break this habit. In spite of my best efforts, I still get the occasional brain fart. Years of conditioning had taught me to react this way. A large number of people, deaf or hearing, can throw my attention span out the window. Fortunately, there were plenty of opportunities to shake this maddening habit. Hanging out with my friends and playing baseball kept me grounded. Socially, I was slowly but surely continuing to make progress. Academically, I was always an excellent student individually, but still needed work on leadership skills. Group projects and presentations helped somewhat, but I usually contributed just enough to accomplish what was necessary, nothing more. In 1991, I came across some experiences that helped me get over the hump. I applied for a job as a student resident assistant at Krug Hall, a freshman dorm. As part of the Student Life program, I was required to attend professional growth workshops that demanded a high level of participation. It introduced me to the dynamics involved in group and leadership situations, and I was expected to apply what I had learned to my job as much as possible. In terms of solving conflicts in the dorms or coordinating special events, this became easy enough once I got the hang of it. Finally, I understood what it meant to accept responsibility of a leadership role. In hearing schools, I never had the opportunity to be involved in anything like this. The next step came shortly afterward. I noticed that, unlike previous years, I faced challenges and confidently handled them. No more slinking off to hide in the library because I was afraid to face the choir class. Gallaudet offered many challenges in and out of the classroom. I stared them in the eye. It was intoxicating. I began to crave challenges. This led to the Alpha Sigma Phi fraternity, which I chose to join in the spring of 1992. Alpha Sigma Pi is a local fraternity that was founded in 1947. It was founded by and has always been run by deaf students at Gallaudet. This was a perfect fit for me as it represented everything I had gone through and had come to believe in. After years of being after being pushed for so many years by hearing family and teachers, I felt it was an ideal situation for me to join an organization that was run by the deaf for the deaf. While pledging to Alpha Sigma Pi, I was required to work together with 11 other pledges. Sometimes it was hard but rewarding work, such as working in a group in a soup kitchen. Sometimes it was silly work, like going through the crazy rituals that fraternities are known for. Some of the supposedly weird things we did actually had cultural significance, especially in areas regarding deaf history. This was part of the fun. Alpha Sigma Pi's emphasis on deaf culture contributed to a lot of our personal growth. Whatever we did, it was a great experience because I learned so much more about leadership and running an organization. I had balked at joining any organizations at GFS or Temple University because I would inevitably get left out. Besides, no one looked at me as an equal. I was always the deaf guy. I would have been a loner staring out the window while everyone else was discussing something. With Alpha Sigma Pi, I was on the same wavelength as everyone else. I was expected to be fully involved and served on the executive board as corresponding secretary. Initially, I was in awe whenever the president asked me for advice from time to time. In the hearing world, I'd be nothing but a bystander. I was not used to being involved in crucial decisions, some of which involved considerable amount of money. I was not used to being asked to take risks and being responsible for them. These are skills you didn't learn in a classroom, and they would come in handy after I left college. There are some people who have responded negatively to my remarks about learning social and leadership skills at Gallaudet, arguing that college is not the kind of place where you spend thousands of dollars to socialize. While I was participating in the internet chat group, such an argument surfaced. I was pleased to see that it didn't take long for another deaf person to jump in and point out that lessons we learn outside the classroom are equally as if not more important than the ones we learn inside. In fact, if you grab a copy of Turning the Tide Making Life Better for Deaf and Hard of Hearing School Children by Dr. Gina Olivia and Dr. Linda Lytle, you will see the social capital and incidental learning are absolutely critical for deaf students, and there is an abundance of both deaf-friendly environments. I can't emphasize this enough. Let's stop for a second and take a reality check. If you go back a few chapters in this book, you'll recall how I graduated from one of the best high schools in Philadelphia. The quality of education at GFS was unbelievable. Yet when I went to Temple University, I had no confidence. None at all. I felt awkward around those thousands of hearing faces, and it took me a while to get settled down. I was shy and withdrawn, preferring to go just along with whatever it was that the hearing people around me were doing. I had a strong foundation of academic skills, but never put it to good use. And then when I got the supermarket job in my neighborhood, I felt like I had reached the ceiling of my potential. Not bad for a deaf guy. I was a car without a starter, a parked in neutral, going nowhere fast. I had the tools, and I just didn't know what to do with them. Let's jump ahead to my senior year at Gallaudet, and I look at the difference deaf peers had made. I learned that I could influence other people and that I could be a leader. I learned how to make decisions instead of blindly following others. And the most important of all, I learned to set my goals higher. No more not that bad for a deaf guy. I noticed many deaf people at Gallaudet going on successful careers, and having these role models meant a lot. One such role model was not a fellow student, but my deaf teacher, Miss Childs. She taught psychology course that I took during my senior year, and she noticed that I had a bad case of senioritis. I was a bit lazy with some assignments, and I had missed a few classes. Miss Childs was having none of it. She called me to her office and gave me a kick in the rear. "You can do better than this," she said. "Never be satisfied, strive for more." If this advice had come from a hearing teacher, it might have gone over my head. I would have never said, "Yeah, right, easy for you to say," but Miss Childs was deaf, and she had a degree from Harvard. Her being deaf took away any self-defeating excuse that I could come up with. There was no way that I could ignore what she had said. From that day on, I expected nothing but the best from myself. I was no longer going to sell myself short. Instead of perhaps going back to stocking shelves, I began to contemplate graduate school. A bachelor's degree no longer appeared to be not bad for a deaf guy. I wanted more. I wanted a master's degree, and then who knows? My self-imposed glass ceiling was gone. Granted, I began to expect more from myself in the terms of academics and career possibilities. Socially, I had done the same. I was no longer a passive bystander. I had participated on the baseball team, I had joined a fraternity, and had the best group of friends a guy could ask for. Yet something was missing from the picture. I had yet to fall in love, get married, and have 3 kids and a dog, and live happily ever after. Before moving on to the sordid details of my love life at Gallaudet, let's conduct a brief review of my romantic endeavors in the hearing world. It will help you to appreciate my modest but meaningful relationships with the opposite sex at Gallaudet. In no particular order, there are some of the foul-ups, bleeps, and blunders of my love life in the hearing world. First, a 3-year relationship with Karen, which shouldn't have lasted more than a year. It dragged on for an eternity because, hey, she signed, and I couldn't ask for more than that. Number 2, a rendezvous with a hearing girl during a party at St. Joseph's University. I could not understand one word she said. After a few beers, I forgot I was deaf. We got along swimmingly for the next 2 or so hours until I threw up on her shoes. End of story. 3. A woman from my neighborhood who knew sign language jumped into a serious relationship with me. One problem, she still had another boyfriend. We were all confused and I didn't know what we really wanted. It was awkward. Hey, she signed and I couldn't let go, and there, let alone realize how stupid this was. Big mistake. 4. A Temple University dorm party. I had a very rare thrill of two women competing for my attention. One of them was the sweetest girl I'd ever known. The other was a girl who signed fluently because she had a deaf relative. Unfortunately, the fluent signer also had a reputation for emotional instability. One guy specifically warned me not to get involved with her because she'll bite you. She'll really bite you. Of course, I go with the girl who signs. She tries to bite me. I flee the dorm at 6 in the morning and never show my face on campus again. There were a couple of others, but by now you've pretty much caught on to the common thread. My choices were very limited. Of those examples, a lot of time passed in between. In fact, 2 years of absolute drought passed between my first dysfunctional relationship and the next. I was often starved for love and looking for it in all the wrong places. Whenever opportunity came, I would grab it, no matter how ill advised. During my years at Gallaudet, I learned a new word, restraint. There were dating opportunities everywhere, and they were deaf-friendly dating opportunities. There was no need to go out with somebody if you were incompatible with just because you felt like that was the best you could do. There would be no more clinging on to the rare dating partner who could sign, because Gallaudet, everyone signed, and the most of them didn't bite. The dating scene at Gallaudet was wide open, unlimited. I hope I'm not giving the wrong impression, because by unlimited, I didn't mean in excess. I mean having the confidence to know that there are plenty of fish in the ocean, and knowing that you have the time to wait for the right one to come along. The right one came along in February of 1991. Her name was Melanie McPhee. She was from British Columbia, Canada. We built a unique relationship and became quite the item on campus. We were known affectionately as Melonhead and Drolls. We were practically inseparable. Many people remarked that we appeared to be made for each other, usually because Mel seemed to be the only woman capable of putting up with my weird sense of humor. Finally, the insanity came to a climax on April 18th of 1992. My Alpha Sigma Pi brothers were hosting their annual Cobra Fest party, and we had a nice crowd of 700 people. One reason for the huge turnout was our eagerly awaited raffle featuring the chances to win a computer, VCR, yes, such a thing used to exist, television, and several other exciting prizes. This was nothing new. We did this every year, but this raffle was just a little bit different. It was slightly rigged. When the 20th and supposedly final raffle number was drawn, the prize was given to the lucky winner, and everyone in the audience began to shred their tickets and throw them into the air. Being one of the officers who was on the stage picking up the winning tickets from the raffle wheel, I began to frantically sign, hold it, it's not over yet." The entire crowd stopped in its tracks. Due to the enormous success from last year's party, Alpha Sigma Pi was able to add a 21st prize to this year's raffle. I held up a blank piece of paper and pretended to read from it. The winner of the additional mystery prize is Melanie McPhee. Mel, come on up here. Melanie climbed up on stage, and the crowd looked on curiously. Many of the people in the audience were aware that Melanie was my girlfriend. Either this was a fix or something interesting was about to happen. "Close your eyes, Mel," I began, "and when I tap you on the shoulder, open them up to see what the mystery prize is." She did as I told her. Immediately, two of my best friends, Tony Peeler and Jeff Jones, snuck up behind Melody and unfurled a banner. The crowd immediately began roaring. As I tapped Melody on the shoulder, she opened her eyes and was initially disoriented upon seeing 700 people cheering wildly. Turning around, there was a banner. "Melanie, will you marry me?" Right on cue, I pulled out an engagement ring and slipped it on her finger. Dumbfounded, Melanie began crying as her Delta Phi Epsilon sisters jumping on the stage swarmed us. Some of the people in the audience began signing, well. Oops, Melanie quickly turned around and gave the crowd an emphatic yes, and all bedlam broke loose. Amidst the celebratory and teary Melanie grabbed me by the collar and signed discreetly, "I'm gonna kill you." As special as the moment was, it wasn't over yet. We returned to Melody's dorm room at 2 o'clock in the morning so she could call her mother back home in Fort St. John, British Columbia. With a 3-hour time difference, it would only be 11 p.m. there. Melanie went ahead and gleefully shared the events of the past few hours with her mom over the phone. After she hung up, I was so caught up in the moment that I figured, what the heck, I might as well call my mother too. I overlooked one small detail, though. I forgot that mine does not live in a different time zone. Up in Philadelphia, it was 2:30 in the morning, the same as DC. What ensued was the closest I'd ever been to seeing anybody actually mumbling on a TDD. XCNM Sherry GA. GA means go ahead. Hi, Mom. Brat here. Guess what? Go ahead. Hold. You woke me up. Let me use TTY downstairs. Okay, go ahead. Sorry to wake you up, but I have good news. I just got engaged to Melanie a few hours ago. Are you drunk? ? Go ahead. No, I'm serious. We got engaged at the ASP party. Go ahead. Are you a father? ? Go ahead. No, wake up. I'm getting married because I want to. Duh. Go ahead. Oh, wow, congratulations. Sorry, I'm a sleepyhead. Wow, what a surprise. Wonderful. Thus began a new chapter in our lives. It was anything but ordinary, but I wouldn't have had it any other way.